The Octopus Hitman. Listener discretion advised.
A groundbreaking new technology stolen and twisted by the U.S. government. A young prodigy manipulated into a dangerous game. An Indian's tribe land taken against their will. All these dark forces converge, entangled in the deadly shadow of a serial killer lurking just out of sight.
And welcome to the Octopus Hitman. This is episode 8. I am your host, Bill, and to my right, we have the marvelous technology mayhem man, Mark.
Hello.
And then our researcher extraordinaire, Mr. James.
Howdy.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we are going to recap just a little bit. We know that Phillip Arthur Thompson has done so many crazy things, but the Wild Bunch now is done. He left them up in Canada to fend for themselves. And now, where is he?
Did he leave them? He ditched them.
He totally ditched them. And he might have even just ditched them.
And turned them in.
Just to get the cops off his trail. Maybe.
I still think that he actually called his handler, who then turned them in. I don't think he turned on his own people.
Probably true.
Well, if he took the car keys of the car, that's a pretty good indicator, right? We're locked out of our car, right?
Yeah,
so I don't know.
True.
So we don't know where he is now. Is he in hiding? Is he back to Northern California? Is he in Southern California?
Well, he's not going back to the warehouse.
No, I don't think he is.
There's no record of where he is right now. He's kind of lost in history.
Exactly. So I have to start this entire episode out here with a little disclosure. We are not conspiracy people at all, right?
Speak for yourself.
Well, you kind of are. You're into ghosts and...
So I have to take my tinfoil hat off, is what you're saying?
Right. Well, I want to set the stage saying that we're not into all Bigfoot and aliens and all that stuff. And while those are all true, of course, we are definitely not people that just have the tinfoil hats, like you said. So,
except Elvis. Elvis still lives.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Bob
in your
Joyce.
basement, right?
Yeah, he totally does. I have dinner with him on Wednesdays.
So the rest of this is going to be partially why the title of this show is called The Octopus Hitman. We've already told you before that we were doing this entire podcast based upon the documentary American Conspiracy, The Octopus Murders.
Yeah, and by the way, if you haven't seen it, I've said this before, go watch it. It was a huge hit on Netflix. It still is.
Yeah.
Very well done, and you'll get a lot of more information.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, they go into a lot more detail than we do.
And so, let's get into it.
So we're going to talk about a company called Inslaw. Inslaw began as a nonprofit organization called the Institute for Law and Social Research. The institute was founded in 1973 by William A. Hamilton to develop case management software for law enforcement office automation. Funded by grants and contracts from the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, the LEAA, the institute developed a program it called PROMISE, an acronym for Prosecutors Management Information System, for use in law enforcement record keeping and case monitoring activities. This thing was state of the art for its day.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. I mean, Bill Hamilton actually used to work for the NSA, and so he understood the background for the criminal and prosecutions, the trials, the cases, and how they were never linked.
Correct. So before this thing came along, everything was in a manila folder in a file cabinet.
Right.
So you didn't know if John Doe who robbed somebody at the liquor store at 7-Eleven and then that same John Doe did a murder
across county lines.
You had no idea that they were tied together.
And it's one of the things we talked about in numerous episodes previous to this one is that the police force never talked to one another. They never had a way to check. And so they lost so many cases because of that.
Well, it was 1973. If you go back and watch TV, there were no computers on the desks.
Yeah, and this is what Philip Arthur Thompson would brag to his jailers, that the law enforcement didn't know what the right hand was, the left hand was doing, right?
Correct. So Promise was a software that was way ahead of its time that was going to track all these cases and have a master database for the whole thing.
I do want to point something out, which is kind of interesting, is that there was a newsletter called Computer Age that was founded by Terry Miller, the editor and publisher of this. And when he talked about the Promise software in Inslaw, they were cutting edge. There was nothing like this. In fact, people who saw the software went, this is like nothing we've ever seen before. This is something that's huge. I don't even think Inslaw knew how big it was and how important it was. And there was also a female who helped develop that software named Joyce DeFoy.
Correct.
And so it's one of the first times you actually have a female programmer developing something way back in the 70s of significance that had an impact worldwide.
Yeah, this is be like Outlook on steroids or whatever. Long before you had Outlook or anything like that, anything you needed was in this software if you were in law enforcement or the legal world.
Huge.
Yeah, so Promise, again, was a case-managed software developed by Inslaw for the LEAA to aid prosecutors' offices in tracking cases. So then in 1979, Inslaw sues the Justice Department.
Right, because they sold to the Justice Department, right? This software. Is that
Correct. In 1979, the DOJ contracted with the Institute to do a pilot project that installed versions of Promise in 4 U.S. attorneys' offices. 2 using the mini computer version, and the other 2 a word processor version, which the Institute was developing. Encouraged by the results, the department decided in 1981 to go ahead with a full implementation of locally based Promise systems and issued a request to install the mini computer versions of Promise in the 20 largest United States attorneys' offices.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge.
That's a big contract. That's a big contract.
Yeah. Okay.
You're putting your software in the United States attorney's offices, 20 of them across the country.
Well, and what's insane about that is that they were making payments. The DOJ, Department of Justice, and the government was making payments to Inslaw. They were receiving money. And then they just stopped paying it.
Correct. The contract did not go smoothly. Disputes between the EOUSA and Inslaw began soon after its execution.
Yeah, not good. It was not good.
No. And then following this cancellation, the financial condition of Inslaw worsened, and the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in February of 1985.
So you would wonder why in the world, when you buy a game or any kind of other software, it's already developed, it's already done. Why would a company need to continue to put money into something that's already been completed? Well, it's not completed. What people need to understand is a database is constantly needing updating and developing. If you've never worked with software like that, it's constantly updated. You're constantly tweaking little things here and there. New programming pieces need to be added to it. Security components need to happen to it. You're installing software on different kinds of computers that need to be upgraded and updated. And so all of this is a support mechanism that you need to pay people to do. So you're constantly enhancing the software, and you're constantly enhancing the company supporting that software. So if that contract went through, you'd need a lot more support staff than just what started and built that program.
For 20 offices, correct.
Why that money was important and why they would go bankrupt if it wasn't incoming to them.
Well, and it was the root of their business.
Right.
I mean, that's a gigantic contract.
And the reason why they weren't paying them, do we know?
They said it wasn't complete and they weren't getting what they were promised.
Okay.
Gotcha. Ironically, promised software.
Yeah.
So after the lawsuit went through, an individual joined Inslaw as a lawyer who used to work for the Department of Justice named Charles Work. Charles Work actually took the case to a judge, and Judge Bassan, or Basin, depending on how you pronounce it, reviewed the case, heard the case, and said, you know what, the Department of Justice did sign a contract for this. You're in violation of breaking this contract. You owe Inslaw millions of dollars. Pay them now. You are at fault. Pay Inslaw the money that's due to them.
That's pretty rare, having the government get ruled against.
Yes,
especially
absolutely.
back then.
The Department of Justice never got a ruling against them. It just doesn't happen. And they were very thrilled. Bill Hamilton, his wife, the company was thrilled because they're going to actually make the money and the company's going to continue to grow. Well, fast forward just very briefly, they appealed the decision, and a court of appeals said, no, you know what? The Department of Justice is right now. We don't think they owe you money. And ironically, the judge who actually ruled in favor and against the Department of Justice, but in favor of Inslaw, was then removed from his bench position and completely from the court.
Oh, look at that.
Which is pretty interesting, considering he didn't do anything wrong other than make a ruling based on a contractual basis.
And that has never happened before. This is the first time a ruling judge has just been removed from his bench.
Yeah, and it's pretty crazy because after the ruling was given, there were multiple threatening phone calls that were made to Inslaw and Bill Hamilton. Just, hey, you know what? Let this go. Leave it alone. Drop it. Don't be considering and pursuing this. Well, they did, and then the judge lost and Inslaw lost, and it was reversed in the Court of Appeals.
And so Inslaw is just sitting there bankrupt. They don't have any money. The Department of Justice has all this software sitting at their building. And Bill Hamilton, the owner of the Inslaw software, is getting death threats.
Yep.
Then allegations surfaced that suggest that the DOJ had implemented unauthorized changes, including backdoor functionalities enabling covert surveillance and intelligence gathering. According to Inslaw, the DOJ had not only unlawfully altered the software, but also disseminated it to numerous government entities and foreign intelligence agencies without authorization.
Hold on, though. You guys gotta understand. Back in the day, it's not like today when there's a lot of open source software where people can reprogram things at will. Back then, software was locked down. You couldn't just make changes to software.
Nope.
So when someone had the source code of this software, it was illegal if Inslaw didn't give it to the company. So they somehow got access to the source code and hence started using it and modifying it and saying, hey, you know what? This isn't your same software.
Exactly. And who did that?
Well, let's introduce you to Michael Riconosciuto.
Michael Riconosciuto was a protege boy genius from an early age. His parents knew it. His teachers knew it. He excelled at school, so much so that they fast-tracked for him to get through his education. Literally, at the age of 16, he was working with a Nobel laureate at Stanford. And the Nobel laureate once said, well, of course I'm going to, work with this guy because he brought his own homemade laser.
Hello.
Yeah. Well, he also, when he was really young, he made his own phone company
Yes.
Right? And so he got busted by the cops when he was a kid.
Yeah, because he created his own phone company in the neighborhood that actually was able to call and receive and everything calls. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely crazy.
Yeah, kind of crazy. And then at the age of 24, he literally figured out how to make LSD and PCP at home underwater.
Yeah, he had an underwater. Yeah, meth lab, basically.
Yeah.
An LSD lab, right?
Yeah, now he was caught. And the government said, well, we could do one or two things with this kid. We can either put him in jail, which wastes the brilliance of him.
Right.
Or we can use him for our own benefit.
Exactly.
Hence why his technology genius became part of the connection to Inslaw and the Promise software and how that back door was broken in the source code, allowing them to modify that application.
Exactly. So now let's just talk about that back door and why it's there. What happened was the Department of Justice started selling this software to other countries where they could access it and use it as a spying technique on other countries.
Because there was no software like this at the time. So other countries are like, we love it. It's a database of stuff. We love it.
Yeah, so what's happening is...
we can track everybody.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. I mean, if you connected all these different companies or different countries using this software, it would make sense. But they didn't have those connections back then. So what they would do is just sell the software to a country or a company. They would utilize it for their own information. Well, that trap door, that back door, as you call it, would allow an individual to go in and see all their information without actually knowing that individual has gone in there to see it.
Exactly.
And then they would collect it and they would understand, hey, these are all the people we should know about also on our side.
So interestingly enough is that, of course, it makes sense to sell it to your enemies, right?
Correct.
But they were also selling it to our
allies.
Yes.
Israel, Canada.
Right.
Yep.
So they were spying on allies, which is a big no-no.
We still do it, though.
Of course. Of course, everybody does this, right? So what this is really is this is an introduction to the beginning of the Iran-Contra scandal. Pretty crazy, right?
It is pretty crazy.
Correct, because Riconosciuto declared that he had been under the direction of Earl Bryan, who was then a controlling shareholder and director of Hadron Incorporated, who was one of the companies that threatened Hamilton at Inslaw. He claimed that Bryan, an associate of Ronald Reagan, was involved in a secret agreement with the Iranian government to delay the release of American-held hostages in Iran until after the 1980 United States presidential election, and that the software was stolen in order to raise funds for Bryan's payment.
Yeah, if you guys don't know this, because it's way back in history, Jimmy Carter was president and he was running for re-election. Ronald Reagan was the individual coming in to try and unseat him.
Right.
Well, there was kidnappings that occurred in Iran for U.S. Embassy. A lot of Americans were held hostage. Huge, big deal across America. And Carter was trying to get them out. He was trying very, very hard to get those hostages released.
Because he knew it would be a gigantic boon to their election if they could get the hostages
Absolutely.
released.
Yeah.
So there's
More
still,
votes.
There's still speculation that some kind of backdoor dealings, not the same kind of backdoor in the programming, were being done by highest levels of government to keep those hostages in place until after the election.
Correct. Known as the October surprise.
Yep.
And it's no coincidence that minutes after Reagan concluded his 20-minute inaugural address, the Islamic Republic of Iran announced the release of the hostages. Minutes after he swore in.
Yep.
And of course, everybody said, well, they didn't want to mess with Reagan, did they? As soon as he got president, they let them go. Well, and now, oh gosh, I was a kid in 1980, and that's exactly what I thought.
That's what most thought.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of money being exchanged at that point.
Yep, there was. But it still doesn't tell me how Inslaw found out about how this backdoor software was being done. And there's a little story behind this that's quite humorous.
Okay, go ahead and tell us.
So the Canadian Mounties were using the Promise software in Canada.
Okay.
And they actually called Inslaw and said, hey, do you have a manual that's in French and English for the Promise software? And they went, oh, what? You have our Promise software? They're like, yeah, we have a copy of your Promise software. And they're like,
how'd you get that?
You shouldn't.
Yeah, because you didn't
buy it from us. Yeah. So Inslaw realized their software was being sold, and when they saw it, it was a little bit different, actually a lot bit different than what was originally configured and built.
Correct.
In their company.
Exactly.
Hence why Inslaw became very angry, and they started asking questions like, what is the Department of Justice and others doing with our software?
And never did get an answer.
No, never.
Lost their lawsuit, had it totally dismissed, everything.
Yep.
Your government at work.
So what does this all have to do with Phillip Arthur Thompson? Just stay tuned. We've got more for you, but we have to set the table. So the next step is we want to introduce you to a character, John Philip Nichols. Mark, why don't you give us a little bit of a background on John Philip Nichols?
John Philip Nichols was actually a social organizer when he started.
Okay.
What he did was he went into impoverished areas or even other countries that were third world, and he linked things like unions or groups or indigenous peoples together to form things like a voting bloc or to form some kind of union that allowed a better treatment for them to work and or do anything they needed to in that country. He, in his early life, along with his family, probably moved at least 30 times.
Right.
All over South America, Brazil, Chile. He moved all over America from east, west, north, south. He was all over the place. He even lived in Belgium for a little bit, selling gold. He was associated with soda companies and a bunch of other things.
Right.
But his big thing, and the thing he brags about, was he was Dr. John Philip Nichols because he received a degree in social work. And his big thing was being an organizer for social justice.
Gotcha. But he bounced around and he wasn't an independent worker, right?
No, he was being told to go do these things by someone.
Right. And so do we even know who that someone is?
Someone within our government.
People of power. There's lots of pictures of him with people in power.
Exactly.
So he knew all the high-end people.
Yeah. So I think that the three of us were thinking CIA.
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, he was sent to Chile to work with indigenous people to help overthrow the government, basically, to help them get voting rights.
Right. Exactly.
Where he looks like, oh, I'm just helping you with democracy. But then once they got up and going and overthrew the Chile government, then he was in New York.
Right.
Then he was out of there.
Yep.
And he got sent somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So he's an interesting character, but he finally ends up in California in a little city called Indio. And this is where the Cabazon tribe of Indians resides.
There's only 26 of them.
26 reservation people.
Yes.
Okay. So it's a small tribe. And what ends up happening is John Phillip Nichols starts to organize this tribe. And he starts telling them ways that they can make money. And they start simply by selling cigarettes on tribal land.
Non-taxed cigarettes. You can go buy cigarettes and cartons of cigarettes without a tax.
Right.
Which he totally missed the mark because the Cabazon Indian Reservation is located in Coachella. So he totally could have had the festival early on and made so much money.
Exactly.
Totally blew it.
Yeah. And so then not only did he do that, but he also started like a small casino.
Yeah, after they realized they were making a little bit of money doing these cigarette sales, hey, we could do a casino here. And of course, John Phillip Nichols, due to all his contacts, including probably the mafia, were able to say, hey, how do you run a card casino on an Indian reservation? So they started one, and it was literally the first Indian casino ever created.
That's what I was just going to say. It's the first one.
Now, I know there's a few back east and everything, and I don't know how it is back east, but in California and Nevada and even Oregon and Washington, they're everywhere.
Now.
Right? Yeah. Now they have really made it big business. So this was the first. We have the first backdoor spyware and then the very first Indian casino.
Yeah, in 1980, it opened up.
Yeah, which is really crazy.
Correct.
So now you have John Phillip Nichols doing all of these things, and he hires our good friend Michael Riconosciuto, which I don't want to body shame anybody. Yeah.
He's the epitome if you had a poster child of someone who lives in the basement and doesn't come out during the day.
Yeah.
That's who you would picture.
He built an underwater house and lived in it. Okay. That's really all you, as a child. That's really all you need to know.
Right. And as it is with so many people who are real geniuses, they do have personality flaws. And Mr. Michael Riconosciuto, he is all over the place mentally. He's very unstable, but he is working for John Phillip Nichols, and he is doing drugs. In other words, doing LSD and meth. He's manufacturing it there.
Correct.
And no one really knows this. Like the Cabazon Indians are not aware that this is going on.
Correct.
And then on top of this, John Phillip Nichols has connections to a company called Wackenhut, which I don't think you can make this stuff up. It's a weird name, Wackenhut, which, by the way, is still in business today.
Correct.
And they were doing military weapons. And if you remember, Mr. Riconosciuto was working with a Nobel laureate for his work on lasers. So
lasers and a lot of technology and everything else. So it was right up his alley.
He was just a really smart guy.
Yeah,
exactly. So this guy is doing
night vision goggles.
That's right. Night vision goggles.
And he was also developing battery packs that were long lasting before Tesla even came up with something.
Right. And then at the same time, he's going to do a little load of meth, right? It's just, it is so bizarre that John Phillip Nichols is using him this way. But one of the reasons why this is happening is that Michael Riconosciuto, his father, his name is Marshall Riconosciuto, he has ties to the government. Now, I don't know exactly what those ties are, and there's not a lot on him, but I do know that he was like a lobbyist for the fireworks industry, and he had a lot of friends in high places.
I think John Phillip Nichols and Marshall Riconosciuto actually knew each other, and they knew the same people.
Exactly.
They ran in the same circles.
Exactly. And they were partners of sorts, or I do believe there were people up higher telling them, you do this and you do this. And it really works that if you're going to be some sort of secret spy agent, that your son is a brilliant genius. I mean, is that weird or what?
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
it's
when you're that smart, a lot of people want their hands on you.
Yeah, exactly. And so in a lot of ways, Michael Riconosciuto is a victim here. It's like he was being manipulated, but at the same time, he was going along with it.
Yeah, but why isn't anyone being busted on this Indian reservation?
Well, first of all, it's tribal land,
Yep.
so it's
They have their own laws.
right.
Federal laws do not apply on tribal land.
Right. And that is why they're making all these contracts, right? They can do gambling, they can sell smokes, they can make lasers and night vision goggles, and even meth. I don't think that's
Tank
legal.
shells, everything. They
Yeah.
can do everything there without the federal government bothering them 1 inch.
So with all this activity going on with all these people, the Promise Software, the INS Law, the judges, the NSA, the Department of Justice, the Cabazon tribe with John Phillip Nichols, and now Michael Riconchuto working on stuff that's cutting edge for the military and creating drugs. Obviously, you're going to start attracting flies to shit. You're going to start getting criminals and other people that you really don't want involved, or maybe you do in this case. So what John Phillip Nichols started was help for a tribe that eventually the tribe goes, hey, you're not really helping us. What you're doing is you're bringing in angels of life and death, and you're changing our whole society and how we live. And I don't think it's good for anyone. John Phillip Nichols disagreed.
And let me tell you, you're going to want to hear what's next in episode 9, The Octopus Hitman.